from the team here at Education USA at the Fulbright Commission. We're really excited to have you all joining us this evening. And in this session, we're going to give you an overview about how to choose a US university, funding US study, and how you go about applying for US universities. My name's Rowena. I'm one of the Education USA advisors here at the Commission in London, and I'm also joined by my colleague.
Hi everyone, my name is Louisa and I'm the Education USA manager here at Fulbright.
Fantastic. So this evening we're going to be taking you through an overview of studying at postgrad level, what the Americans would call a graduate level, and we will have some space for question and answer at the end. So if you have any questions during this session that you want answered, or perhaps you want to dig into a particular topic, feel free to use the question and answer box, and we will scoop round to those at the end and pick up any questions. So please feel free to use that box. And then the other thing, just that you know, is we will be recording this webinar this evening, just in case there are people who aren't able to join us tonight and want to review it. So that will also be made available after this session. Well, so you might be wondering what is Education USA? Who are we? We're a team of advisors, experts in US study. We're based here in London at the Fulbright Commission, and our job is to help anyone who has a dream of studying in the US to figure out how to go about that, and what are the steps as somebody who is in the UK, maybe studying in the UK, maybe looking at that process, how to go about that, and to share some tips, advice, and understanding, especially when translating how the American system works into how we think about perhaps postgraduate study here in the UK. Education USA is a free service there to help connect amazing students around the world to go and study in America. And it's a network of advisors like Louisa and I who are based around the world to help international students get to the US. Okay, so you might be wondering, why might someone go and study for postgraduate level, perhaps a master's or a PhD? Why might someone go and do that in the US when we have some really amazing universities here in the UK? And it might surprise you some of the reasons that British students cite as the reasons that they're looking to go and undertake graduate study in the US. And here are some of those reasons. So there are a few things to be aware of. In the US, the US university system offers a really wide range of choices. There's more than 1,700 universities in the US offering postgraduate degrees, compared to approximately 120 here in the UK. So there's that real diversity of institution. But you'll also find that each university themselves has a particular focus or vibe or personality, much more so than you might look when you're thinking about UK universities. So there's this really kind of wide variety of university, and it means that different universities with these different flavors may offer a really good fit for you and what you're looking to study along the way. Another reason UK students cite to go and study at a graduate level in the US is this idea of internationalizing your CV. We know that employers are often citing cross-cultural experience as an attractive quality when they are making hiring decisions. And, you know, if you're looking at a career in academia, the ability to show having studied in different countries can be really powerful. And it can be really helpful to have those diverse experiences in terms of, and I'd also argue resilience around studying abroad, studying and living in a different country, to keep understanding your own culture and understanding before that. Another reason people cite for going and looking at the US is this idea of global networking. US universities attract top talent from across the world, and it gives students who go and study in the US an opportunity to create global networks, not only with American faculty and students, but also with diverse colleagues that make up so many of the amazing faculty at US universities. So this kind of opportunity to network and to work alongside faculty who will go on, you know, not just based in the US, but then a network across the world as well. Something that might surprise you, and one of the big differences between US and UK universities, is the idea of practical experience. Many US universities and many programs at US universities offer opportunities for hands-on research, practical projects, internships, or teaching opportunities. And depending on whether you're looking to build a career in academia or a career in the kind of workplace, these can be really valuable experiences when thinking about taking that study on into the workplace. Another reason British students cite looking at US universities is the opportunity to expand your horizons. Living and studying in another country helps increase your worldview and may also increase some of those opportunities available to you in the future. Studying in a different country, understanding not only that new country, but also understanding your own identity can be really powerful tools and life skills going forward. And then another reason that UK students are often looking at the US, which may surprise some people, is this idea around funding opportunities. So there are opportunities to seek out funding at US universities for graduate level study that may not obviously exist at UK universities in quite the same way. We're going to be talking about this more a little bit later on this evening, but just to be aware that there is funding that is available to students from the UK, which can make looking at studying in the US a really attractive proposition. Okay, so thinking about the US versus the UK, again, we've got this amazing UK higher education system, but it does work a little bit differently to how American universities work. And so as we go through this evening, some of these differences are likely to be coming out. So we thought it might be helpful to just start at the top with what are some of those big differences when you're thinking about graduate study in the US and between the UK. So one of the first things that you might notice that is a difference is the duration of program. So typically in the US, programs tend to be longer than the equivalent here in the UK. So you'll find that master's programs tend to be 2 years long rather than a 1 year program like you might find at a UK university. And PhD programs tend to be 4 to 6 years long, although this can vary university to university quite a lot. So those durations are a little bit different to how further, higher postgraduate education is set up here in the UK. Another big difference between graduate study in the US and postgraduate study in the UK is that generally in PhD programs, what you'll find is there is an integrated master's into the first year of a PhD program. So it's less common in the US for students to have to achieve an undergraduate degree, then do a master's, and then apply for a PhD program. Students can directly go from that undergraduate program to a PhD program. Doesn't mean if you've already got a master's, it's not valuable or important, etc. in this process, but it's just to be aware that the structure and the system works a little bit differently. And there isn't a need to go and get a master's. If you're looking to do a PhD program, there isn't a need to go and get a master's first. And that first year of the PhD might have a master's that is particularly focused around things like research skills or something like that. That can be common depending on the discipline of the PhD. And if you already have a master's, then that first year in particular, you'll be doing some things on your PhD alongside that kind of master's aspect. And it can be a really great time to sharpen up skills or gain more experience in terms of teaching undergraduate students or undertaking a research as an assistant with a professor. So that's kind of an aspect. But generally, a master's program is a compulsory part of a PhD program in the US. What you'll also find in the US is there are generally no pure research degrees. So you'll find that degrees often have coursework, particularly if they're a master's program, they'll have coursework built into them and an expectation that students are not just thinking about the research, but they're also thinking about the application of that as well. Another big difference between US and UK universities when it comes to graduate programs is there are no set fees or standard application deadlines. These can vary hugely university to university and even program by program. And it's kind of part of the journey of looking at US universities to kind of keep on top and learn about those fees and deadlines as you go. And we'll talk more about that shortly. What you'll find also, again, another difference between US postgraduate study and UK postgraduate study and US graduate study is that you'll find that postgraduate programs in the US tend to be organized by the department rather than by a supervisor. So you don't need to know who a supervisor is beforehand, especially since some programs will have kind of inbuilt identification of supervisor or supervisors as part of their program. And they don't tend to need an in-depth research proposal as well as part of the application to a program. And then finally, I just want to flag that law and medicine are two subjects that work quite differently to how we learn them here in the UK. So law and medicine are areas of study that are only offered at the graduate level, we'll call it the postgrad level. So law school and medical school are only open to graduate level students. So you may start to see programs in law or programs in medicine coming up in the search, because for an American person, they have to go through this graduate study to get to go into medical school, which is a little bit different to how we arrange things in the UK and in our university system. Okay. So a few other things to just note is thinking about a timeline. We get a lot of questions about this. So here's kind of an overview of the things to be thinking about. The first step in this process is researching universities. With 1,700 universities out there, there is a huge number of programs to research. We'll talk more about how to find them, but it's something that you want to be doing kind of 18 months to a year before you plan to enroll, undertaking that research process, undertaking that journey, making sure that you've identified programs that are a good fit for you is really important. And then about 12 months out from actually starting a program, that's when you want to be finalizing a selection of 3 to 6 universities. So about a year out from when you plan to enroll, and making sure that you're also taking any required admissions exams. We'll talk more about those in a minute as well, and making sure that you've got time to put really great applications together, which is what you're going to do next, putting that application together, submitting, and that's normally a year to about 10 months before you plan to enroll. And about a couple of months later, normally the decisions will come out. So this is about maybe 7 months to 4 months before you plan to enroll. You can expect to hear back from universities that you've applied to and their admissions decisions. And then you would be into the process of accepting your offer at that US university, committing to that US university, and then applying for your student visa. I'm going to assume that we haven't got any dual citizens on the call tonight, but please let us know if that is not the case and you've got specific questions about that. But for most people, they will need to apply for a student visa to go and study in the US, and that's an additional process. So it needs to have time for that to be able to happen before you plan to start your studies. We have a huge amount of information on our website about pre-departure events. So that's including travel advice, living arrangements, campus life, things like that. And then you would be planning to go and start your studies. And typically, most US universities will start around mid-August. So their academic year starts slightly earlier than the academic year here in the UK as well. So that's a kind of sense and an overview of the timeline towards getting started at a US university and the kinds of things that would need to take place in order to set yourself up for success. Okay, so again, we've talked about 1,700 universities offering postgraduate programs. So there's loads of options, and even within each institution, there will be loads of departments and individual programs, each of which will have their own individual flavor. So you might be wondering, how do we go about finding where universities where you might actually want to apply? So that's what this section is next about. Something that we talk a lot about over here is this idea of finding your fit. And what this means is when students find a program that is the right fit for them, for their academic, for their personal, for their professional interests, and is a good fit for them. So thinking a little bit about what factors are important to you in studying in the United States and what might influence or shape the decision making. Everybody has different things that are important to them when they're thinking about what might be a good program for them. And what you want to start with is yourself and to think about what is important to you. So it might be that a university offers a certain program. It might be that it's in a certain area related to your research. Maybe there's an archive that is a good fit for you. Maybe that there's a particular set of internships or a business program that is a good fit for you. These can all be factors that are important to each individual person, and everybody's sense of fit is going to be different. Different universities in the US do have quite a different profile, and it's about finding out which ones are going to be the best fit for what you're trying to achieve with your graduate study. I want to mention that you don't just start out, don't make the classic mistake of just looking at universities that you've heard of straight away. There are a huge number of universities in the US, and just starting to try and focus on universities you've heard on in movies or TV programs, or looking at rankings can be useful, but I wouldn't actually start there, because you may well miss out on some great programs. So here's some suggestions that I've got for how you think about moving this process forward. Okay, so thinking about some of those factors that you might want to think about whether they're important to you or not, is you might want to have a think about the type of institution. Public universities in the United States will work perhaps quite differently to a private university. A public university might be a much larger university. It may have a particular setup or system, which is not what the private university has. It may have access to particular federal funding, for example. But the private university may have opportunities and programs that just aren't available at the public university. So it's having a think about what might be the best fit for you in terms of your research interests and your study interests. Will be really important. You might want to have a think about whether you want to go to a very large university where there's 95,000 undergraduate students around, where it's perhaps got a very big campus that is almost like a city in and of itself. Or perhaps you want to look for a university where there is a much smaller pool of faculty, where perhaps you will be well known on the university's campus, that you will be considered a colleague, and you will have a really tight-knit network. Large versus small, this can be something to have a think about. You might want to have a think about the program type. Obviously thinking about programs in your discipline. If you are interested in an MBA and the universities that you're looking at don't have business schools, then that might not be a particularly helpful starting point. But you want to be thinking, particularly at postgraduate level, Americans will call graduate level, the program itself is arguably more important than the institution overall. So you want to be thinking about what career goals you have, if you need any particular types of qualifications, any concentrations you might be interested in. Do you want to be in a program with funded internship opportunities? Do you want to be in a program where you get grant writing experience? Do you want to be in a program where you are doing even more hands-on research or less hands-on research? These will all exist out there. So thinking about not only the discipline and the program type, but the individual personality of each program in there. Then you want to be thinking also about the academic department. Thinking about the right department is almost as important as choosing the right university at graduate level. It's going to influence so much of your experience in the US. So in the US, an academic department generally handles the admissions, it designs the course structure for students, it monitors the students' progression through the program, it oversees all of those aspects. So finding the right program and the right department and how they're going to support you as a student in the US is really important as well. So it's about finding what's going to be a good academic home to you as well. And departments can really drastically vary at each university. It might vary with the areas of faculty expertise, what elective courses are available, if there are concentrations available for your master's or PhD program. It might be whether they're very tightly focused or a much more interdisciplinary department. Again, different flavors, the size of the department, the atmosphere in the department, and then those opportunities for teaching or research or conference attendance or internships. All of these will be different department to department and institution to institution. So it's about finding what's going to be a great fit in terms of supporting you in your studies. And these can vary even department from department at the same university. Okay, another thing to have a think about is location. I'm sure I'm sure you know this, but the US is a massive country that spans 6 time zones, and so you want to have a think about, as a person living in the United States, what is going to be a good fit for you. So maybe you're looking at an urban center where there's perhaps lots of culture and things happening, lots of people, but maybe you're also balancing that against a more suburban atmosphere where perhaps quality of life is a little bit higher. Maybe there is space to go running or to do to kind of slot into communities. Maybe you're interested in being in a college town environment, which is very much built around the university itself and a very safe neighborhood as well. So these things can really shape and change your experience, your living experience, as well as your academic experience. Another thing to think might be to think about climate. If you don't like snow, then being in the northeast of the United States might not be a great fit for you, given the amount of snow that's got. Or maybe you want to be somewhere warm and sunny all year round, in which case you might be looking at southern universities. You might want to be thinking about transportation options. The US has some places that are very car dominated. There are other places which have more public transport to be able to move around, and perhaps even to visit cities like New York City and things like that, feasibly in a weekend and things like that. You might want to be thinking about centers of excellence in a field. For example, you might want to be thinking about Washington, D.C. if you're particularly interested in political science, or, perhaps New York City if you're interested in finance. If you're interested in energy policy, it might be that you're looking at, for example, the University of Texas at Austin, which is, a major, Austin being the state capital of Texas, and a major center for policy around energy and petrochemicals and things like that, given what happens in Texas. And so that might make a lot of sense if that's an area of interest for you. The other thing you might want to be also thinking about is opportunities for life beyond your studies. So what extracurricular opportunities are available? US universities tend to have very vibrant, lively campuses with not only undergraduate students taking part in a wide variety of recreational and volunteering activities, but a kind of emphasis on graduate students and faculty taking part in those things as well. Much more holistic experience, perhaps. So thinking about what's available there. We're going to talk more about finances in a minute, but it is definitely a part of finding your fit. Thinking about what kind of funding is available. If funding is something that you would need in order to be able to go and study in the US, then this needs to be part of your choosing process right from the beginning. Identifying where that funding is really important. And often that funding, especially if it's awarded from universities, is awarded alongside the application process. So being early on in the process and making sure that you're applying to universities that have the funding available to help you is really important. So you don't want to wait to think about that. It needs to be something that you're thinking about from the get-go. A key thing to think about is following the money. So if you do need funding to study at the graduate level in the US, then please make sure that you're putting that kind of finances piece, finding that funding in order to make your studies happen right up there, right at the front, because not all universities will have perhaps the funding available, and it is a competitive process. Okay, so once you've thought about the factors that are important to you and you've started researching your options, this is where you want to start thinking about that kind of broad piece of research. If it were me, I would have probably a spreadsheet running, which would just help me keep track and organize my research about different US universities. So perhaps different programs I've looked at, perhaps interesting web links, in links out to pages about funding, things like that. I would be organizing my research so that I could keep track of what I've seen. So if you have a look on our website, fulbright.org.uk, which is where you registered for this webinar, you'll find in the Education USA section a guide to applying to US universities at the graduate level, postgrad level. If you go into that section and go into a section called Choosing University, we've got a list of really helpful links to specific search engines that help you find grad schools. So there's one called Peterson's, there's one called gradschools.com. We put a load of links there to these essentially search engines, which can be really helpful in starting to identify programs that might be a good fit. So you can also start to think about your research by thinking about if you know any professors, perhaps at an undergraduate level or perhaps on a master's or previous study experience. Have you got a professor that is a friendly face who you can ask for advice or opinions? Perhaps they're an expert in their field and they have American colleagues that they can suggest and recommend to you. And that can be really helpful. If you're in the workplace already and you're looking perhaps at doing something like an MBA or going back to do a PhD or something like that, again, thinking about professionals or colleagues in your field, asking their advice. Perhaps if somebody's already been and studied in the US, you can ask their advice, and you can start to contact schools in your discipline. And you want to think about the work of scholars that perhaps you previously already read. Maybe there are faculty who have been leading the research in your particular area, perhaps in an undergrad or a master's or something like that. So starting to look them up and see where they are, where are those centers of expertise in the US? Is there anyone that you've identified doing the kind of research that you would already like to be doing? Where are they teaching? What are their colleagues working on? Starting to ask them these questions and build out your research can be really helpful. So ideally, you want to be pulling out a wide range of programs, researching your options, doing this a kind of year and a half out, and then starting to get to a point where you can start to have perhaps a long list along the way. Maybe there's about 10, perhaps 15 universities on your list at this point. Okay, so I want to show you an example. This is a screenshot of the Peterson's website, which is like a search engine which we've linked to from our website. And this is a particularly helpful website when you're thinking about deciding on and ranking what factors are important to you when you're choosing a university and which would be a good fit for you. So I might use this tool using that search bar to look at graduate level schools and programs in a particular field. And for the for the sake of an example, in this example, I'm going to be looking at programs that are in the field of anthropology. So I might enter that into the search engine and hit let's go. And this might be the kinds of responses that you start to see. So the search engine pulls up a list of different universities and departments and programs in the field of anthropology. And on the left, you've got a sidebar where you can select a variety of factors like location, tuition cost, school size, and various other settings that help you start to narrow this list down perhaps a little bit further. But hopefully it offers a launch point, a jumping off board to dive in and to start that research and start to see the huge number of anthropology programs in this case offered. So you can start to both filter it, but also as a jumping board for your research. Now, speaking of research, what you want to be doing is as you start to perhaps get to that point where you have 10 to 15 universities of interest, you want to be really researching them further on the university website and getting in touch with them directly. Your ultimate goal is going to be getting to kind of perhaps 3 to 6 universities where you actually submit an application. And so you want to be making sure that you really explored these universities as places that you plan to apply to and that you can genuinely see yourself being happy at. So really making sure that you've done that research and got really comfortable with it. So how can you find out more about each university? You can look on the university websites as easily the best form of information about their programs. There isn't a central single place to go and find that information. It really is about using the university websites to not personality of the institution as a whole, kinds of things that the campus community is focused on, and the kind of perhaps direction of travel of that university. On each website, you will also find more information on perhaps the faculty in that particular department. You might even find that some professors have their entire CV up available on their department website. You'll find out more about faculty research interests and lists of publications. So you've got a huge amount of information about the research coming out from a particular department. You'll also find that US university websites, and particularly department websites, will have information about specific professors that you can reach out to if you're interested in learning more, either about their research or the programs themselves. So you can find out what they're working on and see if it's actually something that interests you. You might also find that there's opportunities to reach out to current graduate students of a particular university, and this can be really valuable insight and experience, insight into their experience as a graduate student at that particular university or in that particular program in that particular department. So you might find that information on the university or the department's website itself, or you might use things like LinkedIn and things like that to kind of reach out, connect up, and be able to start asking some of those questions. Some universities might have Zoom calls that you can book into with a current student, or even a kind of drop-in like Zoom coffee session with perhaps somebody who is the program administrator. So they're kind of places where you can go and ask it more information. They may have information sessions that you can join virtually to learn more about particular programs at that department. These sessions can be a really good way to find out what kind of projects are happening in that department, what kind of projects are students working on, and to understand the relationships between professors and the graduate students in that department. You might ask current students about how close they are with their supervisors, what's the campus culture like, or you might ask more broad questions about the living experience in any particular given location or the cost of living, things like that. You'll find that you can reach out to departments, which can normally put you in touch by email with a current student to determine what it's like to study there as well. So there's a huge amount of information available on US university websites and a huge amount of information on their associated social media accounts and things like that as well. So hopefully that takes you from that kind of wide-ranging research, thinking about the factors that are important to you, that wide-ranging research, and then starting to hone down your list to a list of maybe 3 to 6 programs that will be a really good fit for you in terms of your research journey. Okay, next up, thinking about funding. This is an area we get so many questions about, and we're really happy to kind of talk you through this process and shed light on this process. So once you've narrowed down the options, thinking forward to funding, there's often a misconception that the US is always more expensive than studying at a UK university for a master's or a PhD program. And I just would say treat this misconception with caution. There are definitely some US programs that are incredibly expensive and hugely costly. But there is some good news, and that there is the good news is that there is significant funding available at postgraduate level, particularly if you are willing to be flexible and to go into the process with an open mind. this funding is available to enable some of the very best students from around the world to go and study and research at particular US universities. So thinking about this process right up at the front of a choosing journey is really important. It's going to differ university to university. So that's what we're going to be talking about next. Okay, when we think about funding, for US universities, there is four types of studying, four types of funding for study in the US. So the first thing you want to be thinking about is what personal or family funds that you might have available to you to help go and study in the United States. So in the US, the approach to higher education is that it is a privilege. It is something that individual students and their families will make sacrifices in order to get a brilliant education and to pursue that education along. So there is a culture in the US of saving up and paying for university in a way that we don't quite have in the UK system, which is much more based on the UK student loan approach here, where the individual student can take out loans in order to fund both undergraduate and potentially graduate study as well. So in the US, there is an expectation that you will make a contribution to your studies, and it's worth just being upfront from the beginning. And the reality is, the more personal family funding you have available, potentially the more options that open up along the way, just because it adds additional flexibility into the funding puzzle. However, a really great source of funding is from US universities themselves. And for people seeking funding, this is often the area we see students being most successful at gaining funding in order to help the cost of studying at a US university. So some of the US university funding is brilliant because it is often doesn't have to be paid back. It's funding that is there to enable the very best students from around the world to attend that university and to take part in those programs. So there are two types of this university-based funding. The first type is something called fellowships, which are, at an undergraduate level, we would call them scholarships, but at the graduate level, they're known as fellowships. And these are outright grants that allow the recipient to focus on their studies, their own work, etc. So if you're seeing the word fellowship, that's a name for a particular type of funding that allows students to take up a particular program. So fellowships don't need to be paid back. They are funding that is given normally to some of the top applicants in the pool of people applying, if they are available at all. And then the other form of funding from US universities is something called assistantships, which is basically pots of funding that is offered in return for services provided to the department. So this could be teaching undergraduate students. Perhaps you run a section as part of a section or a tutorial group is what we would call it in the UK, as a part of a wider lecture program led by a professor. Maybe it's marking papers, things like that. Maybe it's assisting a professor with research, or working in the lab, or lab supervision of undergraduate students. But it could even be working in a campus office in exchange for a fee waiver, or even a stipend. So there's all sorts of what these assistantships are there for. And essentially, they, in return for work that you do for the university, which often can be quite helpful if you're, for example, looking to be an academic, getting that opportunity to research or to work with and teach undergraduate students can be incredibly beneficial, but it can also open up opportunities for funding that offsets the actual cost of your graduate degree. Assistantships, if you are looking at those, tend to be renewable year to year, assuming that the student maintains a certain academic standing. And assistantships can be offered on all sorts of different terms. So it's about looking at the university and understanding what the university is asking for in return for an assistantship, and then what that assistantship might cover. So it can depend. It might be perhaps a tuition fee waiver, which is amazing, but you've also got to then think about the living costs. Or maybe it's even a tuition fee waiver and a stipend, which makes big headway into those living costs alongside your degree. So it's really worth having a look and understanding the different program assistantships and the different assistantships available department to department. Okay, so it's always really important to be asking the department or the program administrator about these kinds of funding when you're looking at where you might end up applying. You'll find that generally there is more funding available for PhDs and students who are looking at research-focused masters than perhaps for somebody who is looking at a professional masters like an MBA or something like that. It's not to say that those fellowships and assistantships don't exist, but you may find that there is some expectation of bringing some funding into that perspective, just based on the fact that you may be using that masters in order to get jobs and kind of income later on. Whereas you might find that PhDs and research focused masters have more funding available to them. You might also find that it varies by subject area, not always, but sometimes you might find that the sciences have more funding available than perhaps programs in the humanities. And the other thing that you want to be thinking about is the different offices that may have funding opportunities. So you might look at a particular program and you might want to be making sure that you've explored any funding related to that particular program. But then you might want to take a step back and look at the department in which that program is offered and check the funding available to students who may be studying any program within that department. And then even beyond that, you also might want to be looking at a university and to see if they have what's called a graduate school office. And sometimes they will have funding available. So it's sometimes important to keep checking, particularly in larger universities, to check and make sure that you've explored all the different types of funding that might be available for a particular program. And again, this is a great topic to be engaging with a program administrator or a professor who's running a program, to be asking them about, especially early on in that research process, so that you can be prepared and ready in that process. Another source of funding might be to think about any external funding bodies. So these are bodies that are separate to the university, but may provide some kind of form of funding. So this could be companies, charities, foundations. US UK Fulbright Commission is an example of an external funding body. These scholarships, assistantships, fellowships may have particular lens or a particular niche area, either in terms of the things that they're funding or the types of people that they're funding. But it's definitely something to kind of think about as well. And we'll talk about those more in a moment. And then finally, I just want to mention loans. To just be aware that you can't take the UK postgraduate loans with you to the United States. Unfortunately, they don't go with you to the US. And then we would just say to just be aware that in the US, most US lenders will require a US citizen to co-sign on a student loan for an international student. So most US banks and financial institutions will not make a loan to somebody unless they have a citizen who is willing to sign on to the loan for them. So most UK citizens would have to think, if they were looking at loans, at taking out private loans from a UK bank. I would always just to look at loans to fund your study. I just think taking a step back, because there are often funding opportunities available, and making sure that you've explored those more widely. Perhaps they're not available at the university you're looking at, but other universities are offering funding that could make this a really good fit rather than taking out loans along the way. And then keeping in mind, the university funding that is offered and external funding can be really great, because generally it doesn't need to be paid back. So it can be a really great source to open up and make affordable US university degrees. Okay, this idea of funding strategy, there's different sources of funding, but I also want to invite you to think about how you think about funding strategy when you're looking at graduate programs in the US. So you might want to think of several different approaches. So one thing you could be thinking about is about thinking about the lowering your cost of living. So you will find that if you want to study in a certain place in the United States, that may increase your costs. So just like studying a degree in central London here in the UK may have a higher cost of living than, say, I don't know, Lancaster or Leeds, so too you'll find if you want to live in the middle of central Manhattan, that is going to be more expensive than somewhere like Michigan, which has a much lower cost of living. So you can manage the cost of studying at a US university by thinking a little bit about how you manage those costs of costs of living alongside. Another thing you could be thinking about is to look at lowering the tuition costs. So what you'll find is each university sets its own tuition costs and they vary hugely. So you might find that public universities in the US, which are state-funded universities, generally have lower costs than private universities. But the thing to just be aware is that private universities may have more funding available to students applying to that university. So while you might have a university that has a lower cost sticker price, you may also want to then be checking to see, is there actually funding that I can apply for? And again, a private university, even if it has a higher tuition cost, you may find that there is additional funding available to make it affordable. And you could also just be thinking about how you can maximize that university funding. So outside of what we've already been talking about previously, you might want to be thinking about the kind of interdisciplinary aspect of US study, and you might be able to pull on funding from perhaps a couple of different departments. So, for example, and therefore you might be able to pull on two different departments in order to gain funding towards your graduate study. So of these three strategies, you might not be able to necessarily use them all in one go. You might find that some universities with low tuition fees have fewer funding opportunities, or you might find that the lower cost of living doesn't have, the universities in the lower cost of living maybe doesn't have the additional funding pots you're looking at. So it's about identifying where you might be able to find funding and being strategic as you're thinking about this along the way. I want to share with you here a quick example of a funding strategy. Might be looking at attending different universities in a specific area and comparing the costs. And here's an example. You have Boston University, which is a private university in Boston, in Massachusetts. And it has a cost of attendance which is going to be in the realm of kind of $90,000 to $100,000, and that covers tuition plus room and board and other fees and things like that. Now, just down the road, just down the street, in fact, is the University of Massachusetts Boston, which is part of a state university called the University of Massachusetts. And what you'll find is the equivalent, where you might be looking at 90, 100,000 at Boston University, tuition and off-campus living accommodation and things like that might be around $40,000 a year. So that can be quite a considerable gap in terms of the cost and a way of managing those costs. Both universities are in the same city, but they have a huge disparity in what they're actually charging. So the more open-minded you can be and the more kind of lateral thinking, you may find options that are open to you. And sometimes you'll find close by universities have links and relationships with each other. So one of the fun things about UMass and Boston University is that you can actually take classes at Boston University whilst being a University of Massachusetts student. So it's something to just bear in mind when you're thinking about the funding, to be open-minded and to be lateral with your thinking in order to maximize your chance of getting that funding. Okay, a couple of things about funding opportunities. Again, for looking for university funding, the best resource is always going to be the university website, looking at the department, the graduate school, and the financial aid pages. Check all three, just in case the funding opportunities aren't being advertised centrally. Check what they're saying, how much funding they have available. Universities tend to try and be very accurate, but there will be different amounts of perhaps different information about what funding is on offer. And if this information isn't available online, it might be suggesting that university doesn't have a lot of financial support for students. So you might take that as an indicator that perhaps if you're looking for funding, this is not a great fit. You could also reach out to the program administrator or director just to inquire to make sure that there isn't something missing from the university, something from the university's web pages. Something you want to think about is whether you're going to be a competitive applicant for looking at a funding from a particular institution. Funding tends to be a competitive process. It will go to the best students applying to that university. So you want to think, am I actually likely to be a competitive applicant? Do I have something to offer to this university? Here. You can also ask current students how competitive the funding really is, and if they're doing an assistantship, what does it involve, work-life balance, try and get the inside scoop on that. You can ask how many assistantships are there available, are they full, do they cover the whole cost of tuition, maybe they cover half tuition or something like that. Understand, are they full or partial? Find out, what basis do they award the students in? Is an admissions exam important in this process? Or is it on the basis of your other academics or your prior experience? If it's a business school, there might be a particular fellowship or assistantship that is related to, I know, for example, women in business or something like that. So it's about understanding what factors, what things are they thinking about in awarding those funding areas. And you want to make sure that you understand if there are any extra requirements that you would need to fulfill in order to be considered for an assistantship. You might be automatically considered, so everyone who applies to that program is considered, or you might find that you need to submit an additional application or additional essay or resume in order to be considered for a particular scholarship. So here's an example of what you can look out for. So this is the website for the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, which is one of the top public research universities in the US. It's one of the oldest as well. And we're in their Department for Political Science department pages and looking at a page called Fellowships and Assistantships. The very fact that they have this page is a really positive sign that they have funding available. So we've highlighted some of the key points in the section about assistantships and fellowships and how to identify some of that funding is available. You'll see there, the first box, most students in the Department for Political Science are supported by fellowships and assistantships. This is great news. It's suggesting there's funding. It's not a small amount of funding. It's suggesting that many students are accessing this. That's a great sign. It goes on to provide a bit more information about the awards that they require, service duties, that would be known as an assistantship. And you can also see that it says graduate students in political science are also eligible for a variety of competitive university-wide fellowships. That's known as a scholarship. And so you can see here it's outlining what would be involved in that. And you can see that they're actually linking to the graduate school at the university. So they're saying that it's not administered by our department, but there are these fellowships available across the university to apply for, and they link out to more information. And then you'll also see the third box that we've highlighted there. It says it's worth noting that Chapel Hill is a highly livable college town with a low cost of living. So again, another signal or a sign that not only is there funding available at this university, but there is also a consideration around the cost of living and perhaps that generous funding going even further because of the cost of living. You can see that it outlines the kinds of duties and the kinds of times, so 10 to 15 hours per week, and the kinds of tasks that you might be being asked for. So you can see here the 2 points of funding strategy exist. Both there's university funding on offer and also that lower cost of living. So maximizing your chances. Okay, I also want to just cover off some examples of some of the external funding bodies. These are non-university scholarships that can be partial or full funding. And there's a variety of different resources for exploring these different funding scholarships. So these are just some of the options that are open to UK students. I just wanted to highlight those here. Some of them are for specific universities, and some of them are open to specific communities in the UK who are looking to study in the US. So how can you find these? Use online scholarship searches. If you have a look on our website, in the Education USA section in the postgraduate guide, you'll find a section on funding and loads of links out to online scholarship searches. And you can use these searches to help narrow down the thousands of scholarships that might be available based on various factors to allow you to narrow down to perhaps fellowships and assistantships that you're eligible for. Make sure that you're always going back to the funding body's website for more information about any application processes or any deadlines. There's a huge number of non-university scholarship funding available, but it often takes a bit of work to research them and to understand who they are applicable to and how you might qualify for those. A particular example of an external funding scholarship is one actually offered by us here at the Fulbright Commission in London. So it's a non-profit organisation offering fellowships to go and study at either a master's or a PhD level in the United States. And so we're a good example of an external funding body. So this offers UK students the opportunity to study and conduct research in the US, and then we also offer funding for US students to come and do the same at the UK, in the UK as well. So those awards, the different types and the numbers fluctuate each year, but applications generally open in February, and there is normally a deadline of early May for study in the following year. So yes, even before you've even applied to a US university, you would want to be applying for a Fulbright award. So this is where it's really important to understand the timelines and the requirements for perhaps an external funding body to make sure that you've aligned with those in order to be able to access funding. We have a variety of awards available. Some are just for the first year, some cover fully funding awards for both years of study at a master's level or for in a PhD. And you'll also find that we have in the Fulbright scholarships an option for something called the IIE placement program, which assists students who are going through that program with not only the Fulbright scholarship, but additional support in seeking out university-based funding to make that program at a US university entirely affordable. So if you've got more questions about that, drop our colleagues an email on programs@fulbright.org.uk or drop onto our website. And next year, the competition will be opening for students who will be looking to start their studies in 2027-28. Okay, few final funding tips. Making sure that you are starting this process early is really important. Applying for funding often happens simultaneously to the admissions process, and it is a competitive process. So you want to be making sure that you are up at the front of the application window to a program to maximize the chance of gaining that funding. You'll find that applying for funding often involves time and effort and research to seek out and find the best funding opportunities. So unfortunately, scholarships won't come and find you. So it is about that research and that understanding yourself, what you need, and taking that time to really understand the opportunities available to you. Another thing you want to be thinking about is being flexible when choosing universities. If it's really essential for you to receive funding to complete your postgraduate study, make sure you're choosing universities with a lot of funding or where you're going to be a competitive or top student. So you want to be thinking about that and judging it in order to be the most strategic you can. You might also want to be thinking about really spending time on the university's website, the department, the graduate school, financial aid pages. Make sure you're checking all of them just in case there's a funding opportunity that isn't immediately obvious from the main program page. And so you just want to be kind of aware and preparing for that along the way, being flexible. We often get questions about whether someone can work while they are studying in the US and whether that would be a way to pay for graduate school in the US. When you are in the US, unless you're a US citizen, when you're in the US, you are there on a student visa, and this has limitations around your ability to work in the United States. So on a student visa, typically you can work on campus, on your new university campus, for up to 20 hours a week during term time and up to 40 hours a week during holidays. The tricky thing is that in order to gain the student visa in the first place, you need to show that you have proof of funding for your program. So this funding piece is really important because without it, you don't gain the visa in order to be able to go. So, while getting a job and working while you're studying can be an option for students, it's just something to be aware of that it's more for covering personal costs, life costs along the way, rather than for really cutting into the cost of the degree itself. Okay. We talked a little bit about funding. Now we're going to talk quickly about completing an application for a US graduate program. And so making sure that you've really done that in-depth research process is so important, thinking about what's important to you and making sure you've lined up the finances. All of these things need to happen before you're completing an application. Sometimes I see people jumping to, oh, I'm just going to stick in an application, and it doesn't tend to work out so well because they haven't done that research. So you want to be getting familiar with the programs you're looking at and making sure then you're ready to put the most competitive application possible forward. And the more competitive your application, the better chances you have of not only admission to that program, but also securing any funding. So the more time you spend in that research process, the more benefit it will bring for your application, for the funding, and for your ability to show the university why you are genuinely excited to be going there. So we're going to take you through in this section some components of a US university application. So things to bear in mind is what they are looking for when they are assessing applications to graduate programs. And what I will just say from the outset is this isn't a broad overview. The detail is going to really differ program to program. An MBA program is going to be perhaps to somebody who is looking to do molecular physics master's program, for example. But as a 10,000 foot view, this is broadly what they're looking for. So US universities are looking to assess your academics, so your academic achievement, and that we measured by your undergraduate or any postgraduate degree results that you've had so far, and also any admissions test scores. So most universities will probably want to see something like a 2.2 or higher on a bachelor's undergraduate degree. And what you can start to do is contact individual departments or programs you'll find program administrators will be often willing to give you a guide or a sense of what they tend to see or expect from students applying to their program from the UK, for example. What would be sufficient? So don't be afraid to reach out to a program administrator. Most universities won't have strict entry requirements, and particularly for a UK degree, but they should be able to give you some kind of approximate idea as to whether your academic profile is roughly in line with their usual admitted student. You also want to be thinking about something we're calling here academic fit. It's reasons for wanting to pursue a postgraduate degree at their institution, as opposed to the 1,699 other universities available to you, and how it helps you move towards your own goals. So that's an important idea around this academic fit. US universities genuinely want people to be excited, passionate about why they want to come to that particular university. And so building that into your application is going to be really important. They also want to understand any relevant work experience or coursework that you've done. If you've been, perhaps working in a sector that is really aligned to the program you're looking at, that can be really powerful in terms of your application. And they'll also want to know about your extracurricular involvement. So US universities want to understand you as a person, a colleague, somebody who is going to be part of this university community. So don't be surprised if you're seeing questions or parts of the application where they're actually asking about what you do outside of the classroom. It's understanding you as a potential colleague, a potential member of their community, and something that they're really taking into account. US universities generally want to see a pattern of relevant work or study experience or internships or things that you've done that lay a strong academic and practical foundation for your studies, as well as your ability and interest in being involved in their university, both inside and outside the classroom. US university campuses are really lively places, and they want to see the personality of their applicants coming out. And many of them will want to know why you want to study in the US specifically as well. So these are the kinds of things that they'll be assessing overall for your application. Great. So what actually goes into an application itself? Broadly, you'll find many applications will contain something like this, although it will differ university to university, program to program, department to department. There isn't a standard process for applications, and it will vary university to university. Each university will also set its own deadlines and its own application requirements, so being aware and on top of that is really important. But many applications do follow a similar-ish format, and you may be able to reuse or adapt materials that you're preparing for one application perhaps towards another. So most universities will have something that looks like an application form, which will have your basic information, contact name, date of birth, things like that on it. A US university might also be asking for your admission test scores, which we'll talk about in a moment, but those will be sent to the university by the organization that administered that test. So that might form part of your application. Your application will contain something called your transcript, which is in the UK a really easy document. This is a listing of your academic marks. So if you have been an undergraduate student, a transcript will be a list of the classes that you have taken during your undergraduate studies, the results for each of those classes, and then the overall degree ranking, overall degree award. And likewise, similar documents exist for a master's program as well. So your university, your undergraduate university, will have a registrar's office that can normally generate that document for you, that transcript. You may well find that university is asking for a personal statement, which is describing perhaps your academic interests, your professional and your personal goals, and any relevant work experience. So this is an opportunity to put forth a personal history or context and to kind of sell yourself to the program. You can find online all sorts of examples of these kinds of personal statements. Just be prepared that American students tend to really lean in on these statements and weave a story, a context, a framework for why they are specifically interested in this program and their personal and professional and academic interests and how that aligns into a university and into a particular program. Okay, next thing you'll find is many universities will be asking for 2 to 3 letters of recommendation. So they might provide you some information about what they're looking for or how to go about selecting your referees. For example, they might be saying that they're looking for one academic reference, perhaps an undergraduate professor, or perhaps they're looking for a professional reference, maybe somebody who knows you in the workplace. Particularly if you're doing something like applying for an MBA and currently in the workplace at the moment. So checking the university's recommendations about who to ask those references. And you want to make sure that you're choosing people who know you well, both in and ideally outside of the classroom as well. So if you're, again, an undergraduate student currently at university, you might want to start thinking about building up relationships with tutors and professors in your undergraduate program in order that they might be able to serve you as a reference later down the line. Many US universities for a graduate level program will ask for a CV, but beware, they call this a resume in the United States. And this will list your professional and extracurricular accomplishments. This is particularly common if you're looking at more professional degrees, so things like MBAs and so on. You might find that you are asked to do an interview as part of your application process. So particularly if you're looking at things like an MBA program or research programs, depending on the program, can have these involved as well. And an audition might be required if you're looking at a program in the arts, for example, that has some kind of element of performance. If you are looking at art degrees or architecture degrees, you might be submitting a portfolio of your work. Research-focused degree might be asked to provide a writing sample. So perhaps if you're an undergraduate student currently, it might be, a dissertation or thesis or a particular undergraduate essay or something like that. And then just be aware that US universities will ask for an application fee. Generally, you'll see these being in the region of $50 to $150 per application. So if you think about that times 6, these costs can start to stack up as well. Okay, one thing you want to think about when you're choosing universities is how your academic profile stacks up against other applicants. How are universities measuring you as a potential colleague or student in their department? So they're going to be considering your grades, so your UK qualifications. They're going to be considering your test scores, your US admissions test scores. They might be thinking about your research and perhaps your dissertation as part of your undergraduate degree, the research interests that you have, how that aligns to the things you've previously done. They might be thinking about your work experience. In some programs, particularly, for example, an MBA, this can be really important, whereas in other programs, having work experience might not be so important. So kind of learning and understanding what you need there. And then we've called this the X factor. It's anything that makes you stand out, that might make you more likely to be accepted or more competitive for funding. So you might want to be thinking here about perhaps any kind of undergraduate program. Perhaps you've done something for an undergraduate program that is quite different or unique to other students who might be applying for the postgraduate program that you're looking at. And perhaps you'll be leveraging that undergraduate program to kind of pivot into this new program in perhaps a different discipline, but bring those interdisciplinary thought processes into this new program. Or it might be because you have really thought about how your life experiences so far might make you an interesting mix into a particular program that might help build the case for you into that program. It might be that you're one of the few students from the UK who's applying to this program, and the program admissions folks are keen to build a classroom where your viewpoint is really valued in your degree as well. So it's just bearing in mind that there's various different things that are happening and that they're assessing along the way as well. Okay, admissions tests. So admissions tests are something that US universities use as a method of evaluation. In the US undergraduate universities have a wide way of operating and are less standardized than UK universities, offering undergraduate degrees, and therefore admissions exams at the graduate level allow an admissions committee to evaluate different candidates on the same scale and kind of level out that playing field so that they can understand how different candidates rank against each other when perhaps they've had very diverse experiences as undergraduate students. So probably the most common of these is called the GRE. It stands for the Graduate Record Exam. And if a program is asking for an admissions exam, generally the GRE is what they mean. It's the most general one. And it measures your verbal reasoning, your quantitative reasoning, your critical thinking, and your analytical writing skills. So a mixture of all of those things. Don't worry, if you're a humanities person and you're not a maths person, you will need to sit that maths section, but programs will understand that some people are more a maths person and some people are more of a reading, writing person, or more verbal reasoning, things like that. So they're not necessarily expecting top scores across both sides of this test, but it is just something to be aware of as you're going in. You'll also find that there's other specific discipline tests. So popular one is the GMAT, which is normally for MBA and business programs. You might find references to something called the LSAT, which is for JD programs, which is or LLM programs in the law field. So just being aware of those. Or you might come across references to the MCAT, which is for medical programs, medical admissions. What I would say about all of these exams is they are really quite different to what we do here in the UK and the way we prepare and understand exams that you might have taken up until this point. They are multiple choice exams, they have strict time limits. Several of them are adaptive to your own performance and how you've done. So it's something to be aware of and to be thinking about these exams if they're required for the programs that you're looking at. So just thinking first of all about how important these tests are in admissions decision, you will find that the approach to these exams can vary hugely, program by program, department by department, and university by university. So some universities and some programs may not require any admissions exam at all, whereas for some others, it might be a factor in their decision, but they're more interested in your personal statement and transcript. And then there'll be others where it is a real deal breaker. So some programs might be more interested in your verbal reasoning and your analytical writing than how you did on the quantitative reasoning math section. It can really depend on the program, on the department, and on the university as well. So again, as you're doing your research, it can be a question to be asking about how much weight is given to these admissions exams as part of your research process. And you want to be thinking about what is the appropriate test, and even do I need to take a test at all? So you want to be looking at this as part of your research journey, looking at the website of each university and each program that you plan to apply to. And make sure that you're paying any close attention to university application deadlines so that you can ensure that you have a score in order to be ready to apply to that university. So again, in that research phase, a year, 18 months out from applying to a university, this can be a really great moment to be getting these exams if you require them under your belt. Great news is you can take these exams here in the UK, and you can register early for them. The scores are normally valid for a couple of years, so you can take them well in advance of the actual applications and see how you do. And you can take them more than once as well, although they do cost each time you take them. You want to make sure that you're properly preparing for the exam. There is a huge amount of resources online, free resources, online free courses, paid for online courses. You can hire a tutor, you can buy study guides. It depends on your learning style, but it's worth spending the time to get clear on how these exams work along the way. So having a look into those and understanding what you might need to do in order to put these exams into place. Okay, another area of the application is personal statements. One of the most important areas is this personal statement. It's very much, if you've done a UCAS application for an undergraduate degree, please be aware that this is very different to a UCAS statement and is instead an opportunity to really showcase yourself, really sell yourself to a US program. It's not an in-depth research proposal. So some universities might ask for a separate research statement to outline your research interests and future plans. But this personal statement is much more an ability, an opportunity for you to thread your story together and to show why you are not only interested and well researched on a particular program, but why you align to that program and what you offer into that program and your perspective and viewpoint into that program. So some universities sometimes might ask for an essay instead of a statement, but some might ask you to address something specific. So you want to check the recommendations and requirements carefully when you're putting your applications together. And this statement helps to reveal the individual's character, their motivations, their future goals, their interest in that particular university program or field. So there's no particular structure for writing a personal statement, but you do have this opportunity to be creative and to make yourself stand out. You'll find online huge numbers of resources which you can just start Googling to see some examples of how these statements look. But what you'll see if you're looking at US student personal statements that people have put up online, you'll see that many Americans choose to start out with an anecdote or a story about how they become interested in their field of study, or their kind of reason for their interest, and kind of thread that through to the application itself. Others might use a central theme to link and describe their experiences and their future plans, their studies and their career. The key thing here is not to be modest. This is your time to sell yourself as an applicant, and to understand that you approach this process with a particular worldview, a particular perspective, and that is what a US university wants to understand coming out of this personal statement. So you'll find lots more tips on our website, some examples of successful personal statements, or you can start Googling a little bit and learning more and seeing more examples online as well. You'll also find about letters of recommendation, 2-3 letters of recommendation, and as I said before, people who know you well. So universities often provide some guidelines. They might cover particular areas that they want a referee to talk to, or particular, which people that they want to be those referees. What I would just say is if you have multiple academic referees to choose from, you want to make sure that you're choosing someone who knows you well. So perhaps somebody who's got to know you in a seminar basis, or who you've been to see in office hours, or something like that, if you're working with someone who, a tutor or a professor, etc. You want to make sure that you choose referees that complement your application, perhaps speak to the themes in your application, and also complement each other, so you can get a really good balance. Maybe someone in the classroom or in a professional context, someone who can speak to your research, and perhaps somebody who can speak to you as a community member, or somebody who's involved in extracurriculars and things that you're involved in, and can kind of speak to you as a member of the community as well. So one of the things that I suggest is you can meet with your referee to discuss your letter. Although you won't actually see the letter that they write, it can be really helpful to sit down and just discuss it with them beforehand. You might want to choose to give them a copy of your application, a transcript, or a CV, which might help them tailor the reference to your application. You might want to tell them reasons for doing a postgraduate degree in the US in your chosen field, and your interest in the particular universities that you selected, how it meets your future goals, and make sure your referee is aware of any deadlines and paperwork to complete. These letters are a real marketing tool for you as an applicant, so you can make suggestions about what might go in, but you don't get to see it before it goes off. And so you can ask your referee to talk about your ability to succeed at a postgrad level, observations about your performance, ability to positively contribute, your leadership abilities, your character, and your passion for your subject of choice. Make sure your referees aren't being too restrained or modest. You really want them to go out and really sell you as an applicant. Okay, few things to finish up here, ways that we can help you explore studying in the US. along the way. So the first thing to do is just flag our website, fulbright.org.uk. If you haven't already, make sure you visit our website for advice guides and events. You'll see there's a section there called Education USA Advice. And if you go into that section and then go into the postgraduate study section, you'll find huge amounts of information about all the things I've been talking about tonight in far more detail in the sections on choosing, funding, and applying to US graduate programs. You'll also find on our website our programs section, which has details about Fulbright awards in each award category, the benefits, the selection criteria, and the application procedures. So if you're interested in Fulbright awards, that's where you'll find information about that. Letting you know that we periodically offer one-to-one video appointments, so do keep an eye out for that as well. So if you've got questions about the process, we're happy to help. We also have an email inbox where we're happy to answer questions about applying to US universities, and that's advising@fulbright.org.uk. We're happy to help unlock or decode or provide advice or guidance on things that you're looking at about applying to US graduate programs. We also hold a number of events about studying in the US online and in person. And again, you can find out more information about those on our website as well.